Three of the strangest players in world football right now share a secret that almost nobody says out loud. Gabriel Jesus, Ederson, Trent Alexander-Arnold. Ask any Premier League analyst worth their salt if these three belong on the shortlist for the best in the world at their position, and you'll get the same answer for all of them. Yes. But that yes comes with a footnote. And that footnote is the very thing that should disqualify them from the shortlist in the first place. Is Gabriel Jesus one of the best center forwards in the league? Yes. But can he actually finish? Not really. Is Ederson one of the best goalkeepers in the league? Yes. But is he a great shot stopper? Not really. Is Trent Alexander-Arnold one of the best right backs in the league? Yes. But can he defend? Not really. If you're sitting there right now thinking, wait, that doesn't add up, good. You're paying attention. Because if you're the kind of fan who watches highlights twice, argues about XG in the group chat, and doesn't just take a pundit's word for it, this is exactly the video you've been waiting for. In the next 45 minutes, we're not just going to break this contradiction open. We're going to hand you a framework you can use on any player, in any league, in any era. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Now, here's the twist most analysis channels are too scared to lead with. When we ran the raw numbers on these three over the last 3 to 4 Premier League seasons, we didn't find a defense of them. We found the opposite. The criticism you've heard on Twitter, in pubs, on Sunday panel shows, the criticism is right. Ederson has conceded more goals than the average keeper would in his situations. Jesus has underperformed his expected goals in every single Premier League season he's ever played. Trent's defensive numbers sit in the bottom third of top-flight fullbacks. This is not fan noise. This is not clickbait. This is the professional consensus, dressed up in data. So the question this entire video hangs on is this. If the criticism is real, if the numbers actually confirm what the eye test has been screaming for years, then why on earth do Pep Guardiola, Jürgen Klopp, and Mikel Arteta, three of the most demanding, obsessive, detail-hunting coaches on the planet, keep picking these three? Why does the entire English top flight still consider all three of them to be among the very best in the world at what they do, when the data says they are failing at the exact core skill their position is supposed to demand? That is the puzzle. And the answer is not one clever excuse. The answer is a repeatable pattern that shows up again and again in modern football. A pattern that we are going to give a name to in this video. We are calling it the three fates of the hybrid player. And it's a framework that, once you see it, you'll start spotting in every squad you watch, from the Premier League down to your own local Sunday league. But before we go anywhere near the reveal, we've got a problem to solve first. If we're going to sit here and tell you that Ederson concedes more than expected, or that Jesus underperforms his expected goals, or that Trent's defensive percentile is in the gutter, you deserve to actually understand what those words mean. Because most channels throw those numbers at you and just pray you nod along. We are going to do the opposite. So in the next block, we are going to build the whole thing from scratch. We're going to walk you through the single most important goalkeeping stat that almost nobody understands properly, post-shot expected goals, using an example so clean that by the end of it, you will never look at a goalkeeper the same way again. Then we'll do the same for finishing overperformance and for defensive percentile ranking. Stick with us, because the entire argument of this video collapses if you don't get the tools we're about to hand you. And by the end of Block 2, you're going to be quoting these stats in group chats and sounding like you've been reading The Athletic for a decade. Okay, let's actually build this from the ground up. The most basic way to judge a goalkeeper, and I mean the way people have been doing it since football was invented, is just to count the shots he stops. Simple, right? 10 shots faced, 10 shots saved, this guy's a wall. Except no, that number is completely broken. Say a keeper faces 20 shots in a match, and he concedes 0. Sounds like the game of his life. Until you rewatch it and realize 10 of those 20 shots went nowhere near the goal. They flew straight into the stands. He didn't save them. He just watched them go out. And of the other 10 that were on target, 7 were speculative pot shots from 30 yards that barely reached him at chest height. Suddenly, the wall performance is just a Tuesday afternoon for any professional keeper on the planet. So the first upgrade is obvious. Ignore the off-target shots. Only count shots on target. That's better, but it is still nowhere near enough, because it treats a tap-in from 4 yards out and a floated cross from midfield as exactly the same event. One save, both worth the same. That is where expected goals, or XG, comes in. Every shot gets a probability of scoring based on where it was hit from, what body part was used, whether the striker was under pressure, and so on. A shot from 6 yards dead center of the box is maybe a 0.7 xg chance. A speculative curler from 35 yards is maybe a 0.02 chance. Add up all the xg a goalkeeper faces in a season, compare it to the goals he actually conceded, and now you finally have something that says, is this guy stopping more than an average keeper would, or less? But here is where most channels stop. And here is where we push one level deeper. Because xg has a huge blind spot. xg measures how hard the chance was for the striker. It does not measure how hard the save was for the keeper. Think about it like this. A striker gets in behind, one-on-one, 6 yards out. xg says 0.7. He should score. But he panics and toe punts it 3 feet wide of the post. That shot had a 0.7 xg value, but a 0% chance of ever going in. Because you can't score off target. The keeper had literally no role in that save. He just stood there and watched the ball fly into row Z. Now flip it. Same striker, same 6-yard chance, same 0.7 xg. But this time he wraps his laces around it, top corner, bending away. That is a completely different save. That is a genuine reflex, feet set, hand up, world-class stop. Same xg on paper. Wildly different demand on the goalkeeper. That is why the real number, the one that separates the elite shot stoppers from pretenders, is called post-shot expected goals, or PSXG. And here is what it does. It ignores every shot that went off target. Then it re-rates the ones that were on target based on where in the goal frame the ball actually ended up. Top corner? Nearly impossible to save. Straight at the keeper's chest? Basically a gift. So when you take a keeper's post-shot XG faced across a season, and you subtract the goals he actually let in, you get one clean number. A positive number means this keeper is stopping shots that, on average, should have gone in. A negative number means the opposite. And a negative number that repeats itself over 3 full Premier League seasons is a devastating thing to see for anyone claiming to be one of the best in the world. Hold that idea. We're coming right back to it, because the same logic works in the other direction for strikers. If a striker's total XG across a season is 15, meaning the quality of chances he got should produce roughly 15 goals, and he actually scores 9, you do not need a Sky Sports pundit to tell you what that means. He is underperforming. And when a striker underperforms his XG not for one bad season, but for every single season of his top-flight career, we stop calling it bad luck. We start calling it a pattern. And finally, for outfield defenders, the tool we're going to lean on is even simpler. Percentile ranks. Take every fullback in the top 5 European leagues, sort them from best to worst on a given defensive skill. Tackles won, dribblers stopped, aerial duels, errors leading to shots, and see where our guy lands. 90th percentile means top 10%. 5th percentile means bottom of the barrel. It's brutal, it's honest, and it does not care about your reputation. 3 tools. Post-shot XG for keepers. Expected goals overperformance for strikers. Percentile ranks for defenders. That's all we need. And in the next block, we are pointing all 3 of them straight at Ederson. Because what the numbers actually say about the goalkeeper, who is supposed to be one of the 2 or 3 best in the world, is going to make some Manchester City fans very uncomfortable. Let's start with the goalkeeper, because he is the cleanest case. Ederson arrived at Manchester City in the summer of 2017 for what was, at the time, a world record fee for a goalkeeper. £35 million. And within about 90 minutes of Premier League football, everybody who watched him understood exactly why Pep had paid it. The passing, the composure, the refusal to hoof the ball anywhere near row Z. He didn't just play out from the back, he built attacks from his own 6-yard box. The image of Ederson, ball at his feet, calmly baiting a striker into pressing him before threading a 50-yard pass into the winger's stride. That image, more than any save he ever made, is how you remember him. And that is the exact problem. Because if you ask the average Premier League watcher what kind of shot stopper Ederson is, you'll get a very particular kind of answer. Words like decent, reliable, fine, good enough for that team. Nobody, and I mean nobody, describes him the way they describe Alisson or Onana at his peak, or Neuer at his peak. Nobody says elite. Nobody says world-class. And there is a phrase that has followed Ederson around for the last 3 or 4 seasons, usually thrown by fans of rival clubs, but increasingly whispered by City fans themselves, that he is a bit of a hologram. He looks the part. He fills the frame. But when City actually need him to make a big save in a big game, the ball is already in the net. Now you might say, hold on, Ederson has piled up clean sheets. Every season. Every campaign. His clean sheet numbers put him in the top handful of goalkeepers in the entire league. So how can that reputation be true? And this is where we hit the trap we set up in Block 2. Clean sheets are not a goalkeeping stat. Clean sheets are a team stat. When you play behind the best defensive block in the country, when your team is camped in the opposition half for 70 minutes a game, when your center backs are Ruben Dias and Aymeric Laporte, and when your midfield is Rodri, of course you keep clean sheets. A traffic cone would keep clean sheets in that team. Clean sheets tell you nothing about the guy in the gloves. So let's do it properly. Let's use the metric we actually built. Over the last 3 Premier League seasons, the ones we have clean data for, Ederson has faced a certain amount of post-shot expected goals. Add all of those numbers up. That is the total value of shots that were on target, weighted by how well they were hit. Now subtract the goals he actually conceded. You would hope, for a keeper considered one of the best in the world, that number would be positive. Meaningfully positive. Because the elite guys, Alisson, Neuer, Courtois in his peak, have consistently returned strong positive numbers across the same period. Ederson has not. Not once in that window has he been meaningfully positive. And in 2 of the last 2 full seasons, he has finished below the 50th percentile for shot stopping among all Premier League goalkeepers. Let me repeat that. The goalkeeper for the reigning Premier League champions, the goalkeeper you are told is one of the 2 or 3 best in the world, has finished on shot-stopping performance below the median for the league, below half of his direct peers. The keepers at Brentford, at Fulham, at Crystal Palace, a lot of them stop shots better than Ederson did. That is not a hot take. That is not clickbait. That is what the data does when you strip it of the noise of clean sheets, of team reputation, of vibes. On the one thing a goalkeeper is supposed to do, keep the ball out of the net, Ederson is genuinely, measurably below average. Quick pause here. If you're already learning something from this, if the way we broke down that post-shot XG number is landing for you, smash that like button. Seriously, it costs you nothing. It takes half a second, and it tells the algorithm to push this video to more football fans who are tired of getting the same recycle hot takes on their timeline. That is how this channel keeps making analysis this deep. So hit like, and let's keep going. Because you might already be typing in the comments, yeah, but Ederson's job is not just to save shots. That is exactly the point. Because now we've got the receipts on his weakness. And in a few blocks, we are going to show you what he actually does that makes Pep sleep at night despite all this. But first, same treatment, different position. Because the next name on the list has an even more damning number attached to it. And it goes back not 3 seasons. It goes back his entire Premier League career. Now, let's move to the striker. And this is where it gets uglier. Gabriel Jesus arrived in England in January of 2017, and he arrived as one of the most hyped South American forwards of his generation. 19 years old, already a starter for the Selecao, already carrying comparisons to Ronaldo, the Brazilian one, the phenomenon. Manchester City spent a serious fee to bring him in, and the moment he stepped onto a Premier League pitch, you could see what all the noise was about. The movement was electric. The pressing was relentless. The first touch was silk. He wasn't just fast, he was smart fast, always half a beat ahead of the center back, trying to read him. And then he started to shoot. Look, every football fan on the planet has an opinion on Gabriel Jesus. But there is one opinion that unites basically all of them, from City diehards to the most casual match of the day viewer. Gabriel Jesus cannot finish. That is the eye test. That is the pub verdict. That is the meme. Whenever Jesus rounds a keeper and side-foots it wide, the entire internet responds with the same 3-word sentence. Of course he did. So the question is the same one we asked with Ederson. Is the eye test right, or is it lazy? Is the data going to bail him out? Or is the data going to bury him? Pausa. We ran the numbers. And the data does not bail him out. The data takes the hole the eye test dug, hands the eye test a bigger shovel, and tells it to keep digging. Here is the receipt. Since Gabriel Jesus arrived in the Premier League, his entire English top-flight career, every single season, no exceptions, he has finished with fewer goals than his expected goals said he should have scored. Every single season. Not one campaign where he broke even. Not one campaign where the finishing regressed to the mean, and he got lucky in front of goal. Every year, without fail, the number of goals he actually put in the net came in lower than the number of goals the chances he should have produced. And it's not close. Over the last 3 seasons alone, on finishing percentile ranked against every other forward in the top 5 European leagues, Jesus has come in at the 30th percentile or worse. meaning 70% of the strikers he is directly competing with are converting their chances more efficiently than he is. Bottom third of Europe. As a striker, add up the total gap across his English career. Chances Jesus got against goals Jesus actually scored. That number is roughly 24 goals. 24. A striker at the very top of the food chain, playing behind Kevin De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva on the best chance creation machine in Europe, has scored roughly 24 fewer goals than an average finisher would have scored from the same chances. And now, because we love a comparison in this video, hold that number next to another Manchester City forward who has been mocked for his finishing for a decade. Raheem Sterling. Sterling has taken more shots, played more minutes, been through a longer Premier League career than Jesus has. And Sterling's total finishing underperformance across all that time, the number every pundit has been screaming about since the 2018 World Cup, comes in at roughly 9 goals below expected. 9. Over a much longer sample. Sterling 9. Jesus 24. In less time. The guy the internet built the can't finish meme around isn't even close to being the worst finisher in his own team. He is a rounding error compared to Gabriel Jesus. And here is why that matters more than it did with Ederson. A goalkeeper has a lot of jobs. Sweeping, distributing, organizing, catching crosses. You can argue that shot stopping is one skill on the tree. Fine. But a center forward, a number 9, whose entire tactical purpose, whose entire salary, whose entire selection ahead of another human being on that team sheet is justified by the number of goals he puts in the net. That guy underperforming his expected goals in every single season of his top-flight career is not a footnote. That is a career-defining failure at the core of the job. Ederson, decent at best shot stopper. Gabriel Jesus, worst per chance finisher of any elite Premier League striker of his era. 2 down, 1 to go. And the third guy on this list has been, of these 3, the most publicly torn apart of all. Because his weakness doesn't hide behind data. It plays out live, in front of the cameras, every single week. When his team defends a corner. When his team gets countered. When a right winger runs at him one-on-one. Trent Alexander-Arnold. Next block. Trent Alexander-Arnold. West Derby boy. Scouse to the marrow. Product of the Liverpool Academy. The kid who used to sneak into training sessions before he was old enough to legally be there. He is, without exaggeration, the most beloved Liverpool Academy product of his generation. And he might also be the single most publicly criticized defender in the entire Premier League. Because Trent's weakness doesn't hide inside a data set the way Ederson's does. And it doesn't hide inside a highlight reel of missed chances the way Jesus's does. Trent's weakness plays out live, on national television, every single weekend. When Liverpool defend a corner, and the far post is left open. When a rival winger picks up the ball at the halfway line, glances up, and identifies Liverpool's right side as the place he wants to run. When a rival manager stands on the touchline, and for 90 minutes screams, "Get at their number 66," at his front 3. The eye test on Trent has been the same for 4 seasons now. And it's brutal. He gets bodied in the air. He gets turned inside out one-on-one. He loses his man on set pieces. He commits to a challenge, gets skinned, and now the entire right channel is a highway for the opposition. It has become, in every big Liverpool game, the tactical dilemma of the fixture. The manager on the other bench draws his plan around it. Klopp draws his plan to protect against it. Every single pundit on Match of the Day, every Sunday, opens the notepad and points at the same slot on the pitch. Pausa. So the same test. Is the eye test right? Or is the eye test picking on him because of 1 or 2 viral clips a season? The eye test is right. And the numbers, honestly, are almost hard to look at for a player of his reputation. Across the last 3 Premier League seasons, comparing Trent to every other fullback in the top 5 European leagues, his percentile rank in the core defensive skills falls into a range that would be a red flag for a Premier League starter, let alone a player considered one of the best right-backs in the world. Percentage of dribblers successfully tackled, bottom third of fullbacks in Europe. Challenges lost, bottom third. Defensive errors leading to a shot on his team's goal, bottom third. In 2 of the last 3 seasons, all 3 of those numbers have landed in the bottom 35 percentile or worse. Let me put that in plain English. If you took every fullback in the Premier League, Bundesliga, La Liga, Serie A, and League One, and you sorted them from best to worst on the fundamental defensive tasks that define the position, Trent would not be in the middle of that list. He would not even be in the lower half. He would be in the bottom third. Beneath fullbacks at mid-table Bundesliga sides. Beneath fullbacks at relegation-fighting La Liga sides. As a defender, when you strip the badge off, Trent is not measurably better than a lot of guys you've never heard of. And this is what makes Trent's version of the paradox the most public and the most painful. Because Ederson's weakness happens in a fraction of a second, once every couple of games, and by the time you've clocked it, the broadcast is already showing the replay of the goal. Jesus' weakness happens in flashes, a first touch here, a snatch shot there, and it's easy to write off as a bad afternoon. But Trent's weakness plays out over 90 minutes, in real time, in slow motion, in the biggest games of the season. It is impossible to miss, and it is impossible to hide. Which brings us to the moment this entire video has been building to, because you now have 3 confirmations, all the same shape, all from the same data, using the tools we built in Block 2. Ederson concedes more than the average keeper. Gabriel Jesus scores fewer goals than the average striker. Trent Alexander-Arnold makes fewer defensive plays than the average fullback. The eye test is right. The numbers back it up. The professional consensus, quiet as it is on Sky Sports panels, matches the data underneath it. So the puzzle, at this point, is not a puzzle. It is a scandal. 3 players at 3 of the biggest clubs in England whose weakness is not a marginal quirk. It is the exact core skill their position is built around. And yet, Pep won't drop Ederson. Arteta wanted Jesus so badly, he broke the bank the moment he became available. Klopp built the last 5 years of Liverpool's identity around Trent. 3 of the most demanding managers on earth. 3 of the most process-obsessed dressing rooms on earth. All 3 of them, week after week, are picking these players. Why? That is the question. And in the next block, we finally start turning the video on its head. Why do they keep picking them? That is the question. And once you actually ask it out loud, you realize something obvious, that the entire discourse around these 3 players has been dancing around for years. Pep Guardiola is not stupid. Jürgen Klopp is not stupid. Mikel Arteta is not stupid. These are 3 of the most process-obsessed, data-fluent, detail-hunting football coaches in the history of the sport. Between them, they have won 5 of the last 7 Premier League titles, a Champions League, multiple domestic cups, and turned some of the biggest clubs in Europe into ruthless, near-mechanical winning machines. If Ederson was actually costing Manchester City goals, Pep would have replaced him. If Gabriel Jesus was actually costing his manager wins, he would have been benched. If Trent was really the giant weak link his highlight reel suggests, Klopp would have moved him 5 years ago. None of that has happened. None of that is happening. Which can only mean one thing. There is a second layer. There is something these players do, something so valuable, so rare, and so hard to replace, that it doesn't just compensate for the weakness. It swamps it. And their managers, watching them every day in training, seeing every touch of every drill, have decided that the trade is worth it. Every time. In every big game. So let's find the second layer. And we're going to start with the one who has the most extreme version of it. Gabriel Jesus. Pausa. Because Gabriel Jesus, if you judge him on the traditional job of a center forward, score the goals, is bottom third of Europe bad. We proved that in Block 4. But if you judge him on everything else a modern number 9 can do, the number stops being ugly and starts being obscene. Let's go through it. Passes attempted per 90 minutes among all forwards in the top 5 European leagues. Jesus is not in the 90th percentile. He is at the top. Key passes, meaning passes that lead directly to a shot for a teammate. Elite. Shot-creating actions, the 2 most recent offensive actions a player is involved in that end in a shot for his side. Elite. Not one of the good ones. Elite. The kind of numbers you would expect from a creative attacking midfielder, not a nominal number 9. And here is the one that matters most for the way Pep and Arteta actually use him. Progressive passes received. That means, how often does a teammate pass forward, break a defensive line, and hit this guy in a dangerous spot? Across every season Jesus has played in England, he has never, not once, dropped below the 90th percentile for this stat among forwards. Not once. In some seasons, he has been in the 97th, 98th percentile. He is, by pure ball receiving data, one of the most connected, most involved, most useful outlet forwards on the planet. Why does that matter so much? Because Pep's teams, and now Arteta's Arsenal, spend most of their game clogged in the opposition's final third. Defenses sit 10 men behind the ball. The midfield gets swarmed. And what those systems need desperately is a forward who can drop off the last center back, pop up in the pocket between the lines, receive the ball on the half turn, and either bounce it back into the wide runner or spin and drive at the retreating defense. That is not the job of a Ronaldo, a Lewandowski, a Haaland. That is the job of a false 9. And Gabriel Jesus, as a false nine, is one of the 2 or 3 best in Europe. Full stop. When the ball goes into his feet with his back to goal, and a defender leaning on him, the ball almost never comes back to his team broken. It comes back clean. It comes back progressive. It comes back into a better position than the pass that started. That is a skill you cannot teach in 6 months. That is a skill Arteta looked at Arsenal's system, looked at how badly they needed a linker to run their front 3 around, and said, I have to have this guy. At any price. So here is the reframe. Gabriel Jesus is a below-average finisher. Confirmed. But he's a top 5 in Europe link forward, false 9, and outlet option. Also confirmed. And in the ecosystem of a possession team that's going to spend 70% of every match camped in the opposition half, which side of that trade would you rather have? Arteta chose. And now the same question, same reframe, points at the goalkeeper. Because the reason Pep still writes Ederson's name on the team sheet every single week, despite the shot-stopping numbers we saw in Block 3, is not stubbornness. It's not brand loyalty. It's not he's my guy. It is a very specific, very rare, very expensive skill that Ederson has and that basically no other elite keeper in Europe can match him on. Block 7. Let's talk about it. Rewind 6 or 7 years. Modern football is changing fast. Pep's Barcelona, then Bayern, then City are dragging the rest of the sport into an era where possession isn't a phase of play, is the plan of play. Where the goalkeeper is no longer the last line of defense. He is the first line of attack. And in that new era, a very specific problem shows up on the whiteboard. If your entire game plan depends on playing out from the back through the goalkeeper, if you're going to have your center backs split wide, you're holding midfielder drop between them, your fullbacks push into midfield, then your goalkeeper has to be, functionally, an 11th outfield player. He has to catch the ball on his weak foot under pressure. He has to look up and pick out a pass. He has to bait an opposition striker into pressing him, and then chip it over his head into the middle third. He cannot flinch. He cannot boo it. He cannot survive with an average passing range. There are, in the entire sport, maybe 5 goalkeepers in the world who can do all of that at Premier League speed without a mistake per season that costs their team a title. Ederson is one of them. And it isn't close. Let's look at the data the same way we did in Block 6. Passes attempted per 90 minutes among Premier League goalkeepers. Ederson is elite. Not top 10. Not top 5. Regularly at, or near the very top. That is more remarkable than it sounds, because Manchester City spend most of their game in the opposition half. Ederson touches the ball less often than a goalkeeper at Burnley or at a team fighting relegation. So every pass he does play carries more weight. And still, the volume alone puts him at the top of the league. But volume by itself is nothing. A goalkeeper who launches every ball 100 yards downfield could also rack up a big passes attempted number. What matters is what those passes look like. And this is where Ederson gets weird. The vast majority of Ederson's passes are not launched. Most of them are short, controlled, threaded through the first line of press. He scans the pitch, genuinely, actively, head swiveling, on the toes scans before every single touch. He is not choosing between long or short. He is choosing between 4 or 5 specific options in real time and picking the one that keeps the ball. And when the numbers get broken down by pass distance, Ederson's short pass accuracy sits above pretty much every keeper in the league. Not by a small margin, by the kind of margin that stops being a stat and starts being a joke. And here is the one that separates him from anybody else in Europe. When Ederson actually does go long because the opposition has committed to a full press and the short option is gone, he is more accurate on those long balls than basically every other goalkeeper in the top 5 European leagues. So even the tool of last resort, the panic button, works better for him than it does for anyone else. Now put that together, because this is the reframe. Pep does not want a keeper who is a wall in the 6-yard box. Pep already has walls. Pep has Ruben Dias. Pep has Rodri screening in front of them. Pep has arguably the best defensive block in Europe. What Pep needs, what his entire tactical identity depends on, is a goalkeeper who can bait the opposition press into stepping forward, and then with one weighted long ball, punish that press by launching a City forward directly at a back for that has no shape left. Ederson does that, consistently, in big games, against elite pressers. And he is the reason City can build attacks from their own 6-yard box in the 69th minute of a Champions League semi-final with the score at 1-1. That is not a bonus. That is the plan. Quick pause. If this is the kind of tactical breakdown you have been looking for on YouTube for years and never quite finding, do us one small favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn the bell on, because we are running this same treatment on every player people love to argue about, and the next one is already on the way. Wingers who don't dribble, center backs who can't tackle, midfielders who never track back. Same framework, different names. Subscribe and you'll be there for everyone. 2 down. Ederson, whose real job is not shot stopping, it is dismantling the opposition press with his feet. Gabriel Jesus, whose real job is not scoring, is linking everything the rest of the front line does. And now Trent, because Trent's second layer is the most extreme of any player in this entire video. The gap between what he traditionally is supposed to do and what he actually does at world-class level is so wide that at times watching him play, you can almost forget he's a defender at all. Block 8. There is a version of this stat that will short-circuit your brain if you have not seen it yet. Take Trent Alexander-Arnold, the guy we just spent an entire block calling a bottom-third defender against the elite fullbacks of Europe, and compare his creative output on the ball to the best playmaking midfielder the Premier League has seen in the last decade. Kevin De Bruyne, the Belgian, peak years before the injuries stacked. The man who redefined what an attacking midfielder in England could be. Assists, expected assists, key passes, passes into the penalty area, shot-creating actions. If you line up Trent's numbers next to De Bruyne's over the last 4 Premier League seasons, Trent is not embarrassed. He is not close, but not quite. He is right there. In some seasons, in some specific categories, he is above him. From right back. From a position that is supposed to be defined by defending. From a shirt whose historical job description is stop crosses, stop dribblers, stop overlaps. Pausa. That is not a footballer. That is a bug in the game. And it gets weirder when you look at what he does from where on the pitch. Because Trent operates in 2 modes now. In the classic mode, when he plays as a genuinely wide right back, with Mo Salah taking up the flank ahead of him, he sits deep and whips in the raking, curling, obscene 60-yard switches of play that have become his signature. The ones where he plants his right foot, doesn't even take a full second to look up, and puts a ball on the head of a striker sprinting across the box on the opposite side of the pitch. Those passes are mathematically some of the highest value passes played in the entire English top flight every year. Then there is the second mode, the inverted one. When Klopp asks him to leave the touchline and drift into midfield, with Salah stretching wide instead, Trent turns into something else entirely. A deep-lying playmaker. A pivot. He starts receiving the ball from the center backs, turning and threading vertical passes through the opposition's midfield lines. And when you run the numbers on him in that role, passes received per 90, touches per 90, passes attempted per 90, all filtered against every fullback in the top 5 European leagues. He sits above the 90th percentile in all 4 of the last full seasons. Above the 90th, as a fullback, doing a midfielder's job, and doing it on the volume side of the equation better than nearly every fullback on the continent. And these are not safe passes. This is the piece most casual viewers miss. Nobody in the top 10 of any of those passing lists is playing 10-yard sideways balls to their center back. Trent's passes are dangerous, progressive. He is looking actively on every single reception to change the state of the game, to break a defensive line, to flip the possession from Liverpool's own third into a shot inside 60 seconds. He does not think of himself as a fullback with a good pass. He thinks of himself as a quarterback in a hoodie who happens to be wearing the number 66. Now step back and look at what we have. 3 players, 3 confirmed weaknesses at the exact core skill their position demands, and 3 honest-to-God world-class strengths hiding in the second layer that we, as fans watching from a couch, using the eye test, were never really trained to see. Ederson, not a shot stopper, a press-dismantling long distributor. Jesus, not a scorer, a link forward and false 9 who solves the hardest problem in a possession team. Trent, not a defender, a genuine top 10 creator in the entire Premier League from a shirt where creation is not even supposed to be on the job description. And now, finally, we get to the point of the whole video. Because knowing that these players have hidden strengths is one thing. That is a nice fact. That earns you a footnote in a group chat. But it doesn't change how you watch football. What we're going to give you next is what actually changes how you watch football. Because once you understand that this archetype exists, the hybrid player, elite on one axis, broken on another, the next question is what happens to them in a career. And the answer, when you watch enough of them over enough years, is not random, is a repeatable pattern. There are exactly 3 ways this ends. 3 fates. And every single hybrid player in the history of modern football, from these three to Pirlo, to Messi's false 9 years, to Sergio Ramos as a center forward on set pieces, to any player you have ever argued about at 3 in the morning, has walked one of these three paths. Fate 1, Fate 2, Fate 3. That's the framework. Next block we name them. Here is the idea. And once you have it, once we've named all three of them out loud, you will start seeing this pattern in the sport in a way you cannot switch off. Every hybrid player, every single one, reaches a point in his career where his manager, his club, and eventually he himself have to reckon with the trade-off. He is elite at something rare. He is bad at something core. He is not going to become a rounded player. Nobody is fixing this. The question stops being, how do we fix him? And becomes, how do we live with him? And the sport across decades has produced exactly 3 answers to that question. We are calling them the 3 fates of the hybrid player. Not because it sounds dramatic, though it does, but because in the history of the game, these are literally the only 3 outcomes we have ever seen play out. Once you have a hybrid on the team sheet, one of these 3 is coming for him. It is only a question of which one and when. Pausa. Fate 1. The manager builds around the player. This is, historically, the most common outcome. And it is only possible when the manager decides in a boardroom conversation you and I will never hear that this specific hybrid strength is so rare, so irreplaceable, so tactically transformative, that the entire team is going to reshape itself to protect him from his own weakness. It is not accommodation. It is not a favor. It is a recognition that hiding his flaw is cheaper than losing his gift. So the manager builds a system where the weakness is bubble-wrapped by his teammates. A defensive midfielder covers the space he can't. A wide forward drops in to help him press. A center back reads the space he keeps giving up. The player never has to be good at his weak thing, because 6 other players are already good at it for him. Fate 1 is the complement. Fate 2, the positional shift. This one is less common, and it is more uncomfortable. This is when the manager decides that the hybrid strength is too valuable to lose, but the position he's playing does not allow him to hide his weakness anymore. So the solution is not to bubble wrap him in a defensive scheme. The solution is to move him, physically, onto a different piece of the pitch, where his strength still shows up, but the weakness is no longer being asked of him at all. Sometimes it is a step forward. Sometimes it is a step wide. Sometimes it is a step deeper into a role that didn't exist for that player 5 years earlier. Fate 2 is honesty. The manager admits the weakness cannot be hidden, so he removes the situation in which the weakness is exposed. Fate 2 is the redesign. Fate 3. The manager loses patience. This one is the one nobody wants to be on the receiving end of. This is when a new manager arrives or an old manager finally cracks and looks at the trade-off and decides that the strength is not worth what the weakness costs. He wants a more balanced player. He wants a guy who does the core job of the position without needing the entire system to bend around him. And when that happens, the hybrid is not out of a job. He is just no longer the first name on the sheet. He is a substitute, a rotation option, a cup-run specialist, a player who used to be a starter and now waits for the phone to ring. Fate 3 is the guillotine, and it doesn't matter how good the strength was. Once the manager decides the trade isn't worth it, the trade is over. Now here is what makes this framework not just interesting, but predictive. Every single one of the 3 players we have been talking about for the last 40 minutes, Ederson, Gabriel Jesus, Trent Alexander-Arnold, has already walked one of these 3 roads. And in some cases, they have walked more than one. Sometimes at the same club. Sometimes at their club, and at their national team simultaneously. Sometimes Fate 2 and Fate 3 arrived in the same season, and the player himself did not realize until it was already over. In the next block, we are going to run all 3 of them through Fate 1, the manager builds around the player. Because 2 of our 3 cases are living, breathing textbook examples of what that looks like at the highest level of the sport. And once you see how each of these 3 teams has been silently, painstakingly redesigned to hide one specific weakness of one specific player, you will never watch a Manchester City build-up, an Arsenal press, or a Liverpool right side quite the same way again. Fate 1. Coming up. Let's start with the most obvious case. Because if you understand what Pep Guardiola built around Gabriel Jesus during his City years, you understand Fate 1 perfectly. Pep looked at Jesus and did the math we've been doing for the last 9 blocks. He knew Jesus wasn't going to bang in 25 Premier League goals a season. That was never on the table. What Jesus was going to give him was a striker who could drop into the pocket between the lines, receive on the half-turn, and act as a permanent outlet for a team that spent 70% of every match in the opposition half. So Pep built the front line around exactly that. Raheem Sterling cutting inside off the left. Leroy Sane, Riyad Mahrez, later Jack Grealish and Bernardo Silva rotating on the wings. All of them fed by Jesus' link play. Jesus wasn't the finisher of that City side, the wingers were. He was the ignition. The guy whose false nine drop pulled a center back 3 yards out of position and opened the lane for Sterling to run through. That entire attacking pattern, that specific way City created chances during those years, existed because Jesus' weakness at finishing forced Pep to redesign the source of the goals. His teammates got them instead, and they got them because of him. Fate 1, textbook. Pausa. Now Ederson. Same fate, different mechanism. Because Ederson's below-average shot stopping was never allowed to become a problem in the first place. Pep looked at that trade-off and decided to build a defensive block so ruthlessly good that Ederson would basically never be asked to make more than 1 or 2 elite saves a season. Ruben Dias in front of him. John Stones and Aymeric Laporte before him. Kyle Walker sweeping across. Rodri in front of all of them. That is not accidental. That is a screen. That is Pep saying, I know my keeper is not going to bail us out from a top corner cannonball, so I am going to make sure a top corner cannonball never gets taken in the first place. And in exchange, City got to use Ederson's real gift, the foot passing, the long ball baiting we broke down in Block 7, to break opposition presses open in a way basically no other team in Europe could match. City's back four exists partly to protect Ederson from having to make saves. And in return, Ederson lets that back four play 12 yards higher up the pitch than they otherwise could because his distribution turns every press break into an attack. Fate 1. Same shape as Jesus. Different piece of the pitch. And then, of course, Trent. Trent's Fate 1 is possibly the most publicly visible version of this pattern anywhere in modern football. Because for large stretches of his early Liverpool career, when he was the same defender he is now, but even less experienced, Klopp built a very specific safety net around him. And that safety net had a name. Jordan Henderson. When Trent bombed forward, and he bombed forward on nearly every attacking sequence, Henderson would drift wide right, cover the exact channel Trent had just abandoned, and physically fill the space that a right winger would otherwise be running into. 2 players, 1 position, 1 covering for the other. And it worked because Henderson's engine was legendary. He would put in the 90 minutes of running required to make the trade viable. Klopp got Trent's crossing, Trent's switches, Trent's set-piece deliveries. And he only had to give up a slice of Henderson's discipline in exchange. That is Fate 1, run on 2 humans instead of a system. And it worked for years. Then Henderson left. And when the safety net leaves, Fate 1 has to be redesigned. So Klopp did it again, this time by restructuring the whole midfield around Trent's inverted role, moving him into the double pivot, giving him a defensive midfielder next to him whose entire job description is cover the right channel when he pushes forward. Same fate, different personnel, same principle. Klopp is not going to fix Trent. Klopp is going to build a team that treats Trent's defending as somebody else's problem, because Trent's passing is worth it. 3 players, 1 fate. 3 completely different tactical shapes, a false 9 possession side, a press-breaking distribution machine, a right side redesign around an inverted playmaker, all of them dropped into the exact same category. That is the power of Fate 1, and that is why the framework travels. You can watch a Bundesliga game tomorrow and spot a manager building Fate 1 around some kid whose name you don't recognize yet. But Fate 1 isn't where it always ends. Sometimes the manager decides the safety net isn't enough anymore. Sometimes the weakness gets bigger. Sometimes a new manager arrives and refuses to spend 3 teammates protecting 1. And when that happens, we move on to Fates 2 and 3, which is exactly where 2 of our 3 players eventually landed. Block 11. Fate 2 is what happens when Fate 1 starts to break. When the safety net around a hybrid player begins to cost more than it protects. When the manager wakes up one morning and realizes he cannot afford 3 players to hide the weakness of 1 anymore. That is when the position itself has to move. And nobody in modern football has been on the receiving end of Fate 2 more publicly than Trent Alexander-Arnold. Klopp watched the Henderson-shaped safety net collapse, and instead of scrambling to replace it with another engine at right midfield, he did something bolder. He redrew Trent's job description on the whiteboard. He shoved him off the touchline. He told him to come inside and play as a proper hybrid midfielder fullback, spending stretches of the game next to the holding six instead of behind the right winger. That change didn't hide Trent's weakness. It removed the situation where the weakness got tested. If you are not standing on the touchline, opposition wingers cannot run at you one-on-one. And once you take that scenario off the board, you get to keep all of Trent's on-the-ball genius without paying the cost of his one-on-one defending. That is Fate 2, executed at the highest level of the sport. And for Trent, who by every account welcomed the redesign, it was the best thing to happen to his career since he broke into the first team. Pausa. Ederson has gotten a smaller, quieter version of Fate 2. In certain matches, usually in phases of possession where City are camped in the opposition half and there's zero real threat of a counter, Pep has increasingly used Ederson as an auxiliary center back. Ederson steps out of his box. He forms a temporary back three with two other defenders. He passes as if he were a defender. And City get to play with a genuine extra midfielder for stretches of the game because their goalkeeper is filling the role a center back would otherwise hold. That is not a full positional shift the way Trent got. It's more of a partial one. But it is Fate 2 in miniature, an admission by Pep that Ederson's real value is not in the 6-yard box, so let him spend less time in it. Gabriel Jesus got the ugliest version. Toward the back end of his City years, around the 2021 to 2022 season, Pep started using him wide on the left or wide on the right more and more often. On paper, that was a Fate 2 move. Pep was still trying to squeeze value out of Jesus' link play and pressing and creativity, but from a position where his finishing was less directly load-bearing. Because if Jesus is starting from wide, he is running into shooting positions less often, and his XG per 90 drops, and his underperformance stops being the story. That was the argument. But the truth, and everybody around the dressing room knew it, was that Fate 2 was really the vestibule of Fate 3. It was Pep's way of quietly telling both Jesus and the market that he did not fully trust him as a starting number 9 anymore. And once Fate 2 starts looking like a soft version of a demotion, Fate 3 is not far behind. Which brings us to the guillotine. Fate 3 landed on Gabriel Jesus with the specific human name of Erling Haaland. In the summer of 2022, Pep signed the antithesis of everything Jesus was. A striker who did not link, who did not drop into midfield, who did not create for teammates, who did, however, do the one thing Jesus never could: finish, ruthlessly, automatically. The moment Haaland walked into the building, the trade-off Pep had been running for 6 years, link play in exchange for goals, was over. Because now Pep had the goals. He didn't need the link play trade anymore. Jesus, one of the most tactically important pieces of the previous era, was suddenly a spare part. He moved to Arsenal in weeks. That is Fate 3, in as cold a form as football produces. Trent got a milder version of Fate 3 on the international stage. Different manager, different sport almost. Gareth Southgate, running an England setup that valued defensive discipline over on-ball creativity, looked at the trade-off, Trent's passing versus Trent's defending, and picked the other side of it. He preferred right-backs who were solid one-on-one, comfortable in a low block, safer without the ball. Kyle Walker, Kieran Trippier, Reece James. Trent, one of the 2 or 3 best creators in the entire Premier League, was a rotation piece at international level. Fate 3, without the transfer. Just quietly not in the starting 11 of a manager whose system did not need what he offered. And Ederson, if we are being honest, has walked a very similar road with the Selecao. He is up against an all-timer in Ederson. And unlike Ederson, Ederson is elite at both jobs, the passing and the shot stopping. When you can have both, you don't accept the trade. So Brazil, in the biggest windows, has almost always picked Ederson. That is not Fate 3 by dismissal. That is Fate 3 by comparison. And it is just as final. Which leaves us with only one thing left to answer. Block 12. The last one. So here is where we land. Modern football has done something quietly radical over the last 20 years. It has stopped asking players to be the position they wear on their back. A goalkeeper does not have to be a shot stopper first. A number 9 does not have to be a finisher first. A right back does not have to be a defender first. The shirt is now a starting suggestion, not a job description. And that shift, more than any tactical trend, any transfer market boom, any managerial revolution, is the reason players like Ederson, Gabriel Jesus, and Trent Alexander-Arnold get to be considered among the very best in the world despite failing, statistically, at the core skill their position was invented for. The game has decided their rare thing is worth more than their broken thing, and it built entire trophy-winning ecosystems around them to prove it. But, and this is the honest part, That beauty comes with a receipt. It is entirely fair to look at these three, and at every hybrid player who has ever walked one of the three fates, and to point at the weakness and say, no, that is a real cost. That is not a footnote. That is a knife-edge trade every single season, and one bad injury, one wrong manager, one wrong draw in the Champions League round of 16, and the trade goes the other way. Every hybrid player is one bad month away from Fate 3. That is the price of the archetype. And the great managers of this era have decided to pay it. The framework, though, the framework travels. And that is the part we want you to walk away with. Because now, when you watch any player at any level, in any league, and you find yourself getting into the same argument you have been getting into for years, but he can't defend, but he can't finish, but he's not a proper number 9, you have a better question to ask. Which fate is he on? Is his manager building around him? Is he in the middle of a positional shift? Or is a new signing coming that is about to write him out of the story? Ask that question, and the argument stops being noise and starts being analysis. Pausa. So here is where we hand the framework over to you. Drop your take in the comments, and be specific, because we read them. 3 questions. 1. Of the 3 players in this video, Ederson, Gabriel Jesus, Trent Alexander-Arnold, which one do you think is on the most dangerous fate right now, heading into the next 12 months? Because arguments can honestly be made for all 3, and we want to hear yours. 2. Name one hybrid player from your own team who fits this archetype. Not a superstar, not a discourse magnet, a guy from your team. Tell us which axis he is elite on. Tell us which axis he is broken on. And tell us which fate his manager is currently running. That is the test that proves the framework works. 3. And this one is the spiciest. When you look at Kevin De Bruyne in 2026, the injuries, the drop in minutes, the way Pep is using him now, is he starting to walk Fate 3? Or has he just moved into Fate 2, and nobody is calling it that yet? Fight about it in the comments. We'll be reading. While you're down there, do us the 3 things that keep this channel alive. Hit that like button. It takes half a second, it costs you nothing, and it is genuinely the difference between this video reaching another 20,000 football fans this weekend or dying in the algorithm tonight. Smash that subscribe if you have not already, because we are running this same treatment, same framework, same data, same brutal honesty on more players every single week, and you don't want to be the guy who missed the one about your favorite. And ring that bell, because when we drop the next one, we want it to actually reach you, not sit in a subscription tab you never open. We already have the next names lined up. Wingers who cannot dribble but change games from the touchline anyway. Center backs who cannot tackle but read the game 2 seconds faster than anyone else on the pitch. Central midfielders who never track back but still start every big game for their national team. Same framework, same 3 fates, different names on the shirt. And if you enjoyed this one, if the way we broke down the metrics, then flipped the eye test, then handed you a framework you can actually use, go and check out our video on the most iconic Ronaldo performance of all time. Because it's another player who had a very specific weakness that managers were more than willing to build the entire team around. That link is on your screen right now. Go watch it, and we'll see you in the next one.